My name is Jimmy Armour. I am the GRC manager and a vCISO virtual CISO with Appalachian Technologies. We're a managed service provider, managed security service provider, consulting agency based out of Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. I live in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania, so I'm pretty local. Born in PA, grew up PA, went to Penn State University, so pretty much been in PA my whole life. um, I just hit 10 years of experience this year. I've been with Appalachia for a little over 4 years. Out of college, I graduated, joined a consulting boutique named Security Risk Advisors out of Philly, which was fun, but it's the consulting that is spending 80 hours a week, right? It's the chew you up and spit you out type of consulting. A lot of great experience, Fortune 100, traveled the world. But when I tell people when I met my wife, I decided to change pace and get a little bit better work-life balance. So I've been with Appalachian Technologies a little over 4 years. My main goal is to work with organizations to help build security programs and do a lot of things like this and educate. It's a passion of mine. I think there's a lot of misconceptions in cybersecurity, and man, oh man, are there acronyms. And they mean a little bit different mean a little bit different things depending on who you talk to, and at what point you are in your cybersecurity maturity. So it's a passion of mine to work with clients, build security architecture, build security programs. And one of the things that we do, and kind of what we're going to talk about here today with This Is Not a Drill, a leader's guide to ransomware and community resilience, one of the things and one of the big discussion topics that we usually have is about ransomware. So one thing that you're not going to hear from me today, this isn't going to be a sales pitch. That's as much as you're going to hear. You're going to see Appalachian Technologies logos on the screen, but I'm not here to sell you my company. I'm just here to talk about ransomware. If at any point anybody has any questions, please feel free to throw them in the chat. I'm happy to answer as many as possible. I know that we have a pretty long session here today, though the slides may only take a half hour to 45 minutes. So I'm here to answer as many questions as possible. But with that being said, what we're going to talk about today here, the agenda. We'll cover the definition of ransomware, and we'll talk about the anatomy of a crisis. We're going to use, a local situation that just occurred, middle of last year, and got resolved this year, or at least became public. And there's some public information out there around it. We'll cover the myth of too small to target. We'll cover 3 pillars of protection, and we'll cover leading through the noise. Again, if anybody has any questions, feel free to jump in. And at some point in this, I do have some audience engagement. So we'll take pauses and think about things. With that being said, let's get into the fun stuff. So what is ransomware? Ransomware is a combination or a play on the base word of malware, which is another combination of malicious software. Ransomware, per the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, which is a federal agency that the federal government, state government uses. They have tons of standards. If you hear NIST 800 171, NIST 853, that sort of stuff, they have a bunch of frameworks and standards and all that type of documentation out there. If you don't like reading documentation, you need help going to sleep, they have a ton of reading material for you. But one of the nicest things, or one of the easiest things I think to do, is kind of standardize on what the definition of what we're talking about is. Everybody kind of has their own little bit of definition of ransomware. And I even think this definition of ransomware isn't as up to date as it needs to be. But NIST defines it as: ransomware is a type of malicious attack where attackers encrypt an organization's data and demand payment to restore access. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. I think most people have kind of heard of ransomware, at least in the news or that type of stuff. It is a very prominent type of attack because it's financially successful for a lot of the attackers, right? They get paid doing this. If they didn't get paid, it probably wouldn't be as prevalent. It is very disruptive to organizations. It is probably one of the most disruptive things that they can do, or a malicious actor can do to an organization. So there's a lot of reasons as to why ransomware is so prevalent. But the one thing that I would add to this definition that we've seen more recently is the added element of extortion. or blackmail. Uh, a lot of our clients, or what we've seen a lot of situations in the past, is they will attempt to exfil data or exfiltrate data. And what does that mean? They will get into the environment, they'll establish persistence, they'll try to gain access to data. One of the key things they're looking for as well is your cyber insurance policy if you have one. That way they know how much they can ask as a ransom payment. But what they'll do is they'll try to get all the secret sauce, all type of regulated data that you may have access to, stuff that's not good if it goes public. And then at the back end of it, they'll attempt to encrypt. Even if they don't get to the encryption phase, they still have your data or may have your data. And at that point, they will say, we're going to leak this and it will be a data breach for you unless you pay us XYZ, right? So there's kind of a couple elements to this. Sometimes, blackmail, ransomware, it only gets to the blackmail phase. Sometimes it only does the ransom phase. Sometimes it's both. They have your data and encrypted it on your side. So there's a couple of different elements that can occur. But this is kind of what the definition is based off of NIST. And NIST is one of, again, the big federal agencies. A lot of people standardized off of NIST, including the federal government themselves. So that is what we're kind of talking about in terms of the definition of ransomware. So one of the things that we're going to talk about today and kind of use this is we're going to use York City's ransomware event that occurred in July of 2025. It just had public information come out about it a couple months ago. And I have a couple of quotes from the former mayor. But one thing that I will note here is there is no secret information. All of the information that I have that I'm presenting on and I am going to be speaking about is public knowledge. It is in public articles. You can go find it yourself. There's no secret, information behind the scenes. We didn't, as in we, my company did not work this incident. We are not, intimately familiar with it. So you're not going to get any sort of inside information as to what had occurred, which is good because there's not any information that I could get in trouble speaking about, but also potentially it's a little bit of a letdown only because there's not a lot of information that we have in terms of how it specifically happened. We have guesses based off of quotes, but we don't have specifics or certain specifics that I would usually like to do when going through a ransomware breakdown of this was patient zero, this is how they moved laterally, all that type of stuff. But let's kind of talk about the a little bit of a non-technical breakdown of the recent attack. So again, what happened according to publicly available information? Ransomware attack July of 2025 impacted York City. It started mid-July. There's a couple of different dates, but essentially the teens in terms of dates. That's roughly when it started in July. Former Mayor Helfrich, I'm hoping I'm saying that correctly, said that he believed the attackers accessed the systems through a backdoor, which is something that we've seen. A lot of organizations forget about all of the ways into their environment, into their network, and they can access through any sort of means that sometimes IT people put in certain places because it makes it easier to get into the network. But attackers can find that. They're constantly scanning. Even as we speak right now, they're scanning everybody's open ports, ways to get in. And if they find one, they can try to either guess the password, they can try to crack the password. And depending on the sophistication of the password, it can be cracked pretty easily, or it can take a long time to crack. The cost, this is kind of another one of those letdowns. Ransomware tends to be very, very expensive. Now, the initial ransomware demand was $1 million. They knew what the cyber insurance coverage was. That's why they requested $1 million. Now, the insurance company, the cyber insurance company that they have, and I don't know who it is. They don't. The former mayor does not remember who the insurance company was in this instance. They have a team of negotiators that are, they do this for a living. They negotiate, on the dark web with the attackers, and they negotiated them down to $500,000 and paid the $500,000. Now, the insurance paid the ransom. So York only had to pay their $25,000 deductible to the insurance company. But what isn't listed here is all of the soft costs that come along with a ransomware event. And then some people may say, okay, well, what do you classify as soft cost? Well, everybody has day jobs, right? We all have things that we have to do. We all have, typical day to day projects, things that we're working on. Well, when ransomware comes in and impacts things for a couple of weeks to 3 weeks, well, now all those timelines are pushed. Things are time is spent from resources like myself, responding to the actual incident rather than doing other work or progressing other projects. So it's impactful in terms of internal company timelines. It's impactful because your resources are getting burnt out. They're spending a lot of time, especially IT resources, are usually working. When I was doing it, I was working 20-hour days and sleeping for 4 hours, usually for a week straight. It can get pretty bad in terms of burnout. That obviously then when you start coming back in and doing your normal day to day again, it takes a little bit to get back into the swing of things. So there's a lot of soft costs, business interruption, that sort of thing, that it relates to when we talk about soft costs around ransomware. The only hard costs that we know, the initial ransomware demand was $1 million. Negotiators negotiated it down to 500,000. York was on the hook for 25,000 of it because the 500,000 was paid by the insurance company. Now, another soft cost is now York City has a insurance event on their cyber insurance. So their insurance premium is going to go up, which means for the next X amount of years, they're going to be paying a lot more money for cyber insurance. And one key thing, this isn't necessarily York specific, but the third bullet point there, or the third main bullet point there, it's kind of odd in terms of timing, but at the same time, the PA Attorney General's office was hit with ransomware and shut down phones, email, website, and other IT functions in Harrisburg. There has been no note whether this was connected at all. It is just interesting in terms of timing. We're not even sure if it was the same hacker group, if you will, that performed both of these attacks. But let's talk about the ripple effect of the ransomware. So we kind of talked about some of those soft costs, right? So one of the quotes that I have here from former Mayor Helfrich, again, I hope I'm saying that correctly. Quote, "We had no computers or email or anything. They locked up everything. That's why the parking garages wouldn't work." So that's interesting, right? We talk about ransomware, business continuity, company disruption. Email was down for about 2 weeks. Well, there's a lot of things that municipalities do, and email is the number one way of communicating, both internally, externally. Everybody relies so much on email nowadays, and it's just gone for 2 weeks. That's really impactful. Parking issues, they lasted about 3 weeks. From the reports that I was reading, they went to a flat fee as opposed to any sort of electronic style of payment. So they were still getting some, but I'm sure there was some sort of revenue loss from the parking garages. Then one of the big things when we kind of talk about ripple effect and why it's important to think about business disruption, especially when being in the public sector, there's a lot of public trust, right? They want the local government to work and work well, right? Everybody pays their tax dollars. Everybody on here, right? We all pay taxes. We want things to be able to work smoothly, and we just want things to work when it's time to work. When things are down, when you can't even communicate, things are there's a hecticness in the air. It really makes the public distrust. It kind of breaks or hinders or impacts that public trust, and that's so key for local government and just government in general, right? To have, they need to have the trust of the public. And one of the key impacts here is, and I'm guessing, I don't live in the York area, but it seems like this was a very big trend when I was going through and reading a bunch of the articles about this. Apparently, they're 5 years behind certain financial audits, and this delayed progress even further in terms of the financial audits and getting caught up. So it very impactful. And from a political perspective, there's political capital that gets spent on this too, right? I mean, political capital is spent on public trust, getting certain things put in place. If public trust is impacted and certain things that the public really cares about, which is what I garnish from looking at all of these articles, if things are being impacted like this, yeah, well, maybe former mayor for a reason. And I'm not saying that 100% certainty. I'm just going based off of my personal opinion and looking at what the articles were talking about. But those are some things that you need to think about. It's not just the cost of getting access back to the data. And one of the things when we talk about soft costs as well, York paid, or at least their insurance company paid, right? But they paid the ransom to get access back to their systems, get access back to their data. That access is not instant. They were sent instructions and they needed to then work to carry out the instructions to decrypt the data and get access back to that data. So it's not we decide to pay and then, tomorrow we're back up and running. It's you still got a couple more weeks of going through and verifying that all the ransomware is out and that the instructions are carried out from the malicious actors. And in most cases, I've had a lot of people ask me questions about this in terms of why would we pay? They're bad people. They're criminals. Why would we pay? Well, again, it's a business model. They view this as a business. It is in their best interest to give you good instructions to decrypt their data. Otherwise, if they're found out to not be giving you access back to your data, they're never going to get paid again. And they're doing this for money most of the time. Sometimes they're doing it just to impact. But most of the time, they're doing it for money or at least a financial component. It is in their interest to give you access back to that data. So I'm not here to say you should pay or you shouldn't pay. That is a discussion that you have to have with your own municipality, set regulations, talk to your insurance carrier, talk to your legal team. At that point, you can decide. I will not give a recommendation one way or the other because I just don't know. I can't give you a personal recommendation. It depends on your business continuity and your situation itself. But I will say that I've had a lot of people say we don't want to pay because they're criminals. And how can we trust them? Well, it's a financial model. It's a business model. If they're offering to decrypt, most likely, again, nothing's 100% certain. That's why we have the Better Business Bureau, right? People get lemons and they buy things and things don't work, right? They get delivered the wrong thing. Things are broken. It's not 100% certainty, but most of the time it comes through. If you pay, they will decrypt. Now, the question from a cybersecurity perspective then is, how are you sure that they're out and they won't just encrypt you again in 2 years, right, to get another payment? And that would be a great question. There's no for sure way of knowing outside of working with your security team to ensure that you have the proper security put in place. But that's a little bit about, kind of the ripple effect and thinking about the costs and the soft costs and all that type of stuff around ransomware. It isn't just they demanded the $1 million ransom payment and, negotiated down to 500,000 but the insurance carrier paid it. So York only was on the hook for 25,000. That's true, but there's a lot of other costs that are associated with it. Public impact, all that type of stuff that needs to be considered or at least thought about when thinking about a ransomware scenario. So let's talk quickly about a ransomware timeline. And there's a lot of kind of cybersecurity specific language on here, but this kind of lays out what a typical ransomware timeline, not every single one, but a typical ransomware timeline would look like. Initial access, this is usually not all the time, through a phishing email. Getting credentials. As this is not the case in York. York, they had backdoor, or at least it's assumed, right, that there was a backdoor entrance. We've seen previous clients before have backdoor. They had RDP open, remote desktop protocol, where they could they just guessed the password or cracked the password, right? But they remoted in with valid credentials, right? So that's kind of the initial access. There's a multitude of different ways they can. The most popular is phishing. And so what is phishing, right? Phishing is getting some sort of email or message or something like that that tries to get you to provide login credentials, right? I'm sure everybody here has probably gone through some sort of like what we call end user security awareness training. They have a lot of skits now where they talk about, oh, well, you get this email and it clicks the link. Don't click the link. It takes you to this login page. Don't put your credentials in. Um, Banks and all that type of stuff will sit there and say, we'll never ask for your password, all that type of stuff. Because email is the number one communication vector for every entity right now, probably in the world, it is the number one attack method. There's a ton of different spin-offs from phishing. We could talk about vishing with a V, which is voice phishing with the lovely kind of boom of AI that we've had within the past 6 years. It's become a lot more prevalent. I've received phone calls before impersonating my president at the company. Now, I know enough of how my president speaks to know when it's not him, but all they need is very small snippets of your voice, and AI can run and just turn over, and essentially impersonate what someone's voice would sound like. And if somebody says, "Oh, you sound a little different," "Oh, I'm just feeling a little under the weather." It's a simple thing. Would you think anything different, right? So there's a lot of different things in regards to phishing, and vishing is a sub thing of phishing. You have smishing, which is SMS, which is text. Getting text messages of saying, "Hey, I'm stuck. Can you get me a gift card?" or something like that, right? There's SMS, there's email, there's voice in terms of phone calls, all that type of stuff, and you can also do video. There's a big risk, and this is something that I've talked about internally at my organization. For instance, me doing something public like this, somebody could be recording me and then impersonate me utilizing an AI, right? Because I have a couple of snippets of actual video that's out here. Being more of a public figure, somebody can impersonate me, and that is a big risk in terms of the weight that it could carry in terms of getting access for certain things, right? So there's a lot of things to think about, and that's all very prevalent things in terms of municipalities being public figures. Things that if somebody were to impersonate you, what could they do, right? Would somebody trust it? So those are all things to think about in terms of that. But that's kind of initial access. In terms of the command and control, that's more of a technical thing. Usually it's setting up some sort of persistence methodology to be able to communicate back to their network. Credential access, lateral movement, it's just trying to get to that type of data, finding the sensitive information, finding the sensitive resources. Data exfil and anti-forensics are trying to cover their tracks. They're trying to exfil that type of data. Encryption and impact, extortion and negotiation, right? And those are, that's when you've been hit. You get the README file on your desktop. Sometimes your desktop has the background saying you've been encrypted. You can't access data. You can't access other stuff. That's when it's when you've been hit. But it starts before then, right? So it's a little bit about kind of like the anatomy of what a ransomware incident would look like. Now the next one, and in terms of time, I think I have to speed a little bit up through some of these slides. But we'll talk about the myth of too small to target. This is another thing in terms of working with a lot of SMBs, working with a lot of townships, municipalities, right? I hear this all the time. Why would they come for us? We're a small fish. Why would they target us? What do we have? Well, we'll talk a little bit about that. But before that, let's talk about some statistics. According to Zscaler, which is Zscaler is a very prominent cybersecurity company. Total government, right, is the ninth most targeted sector. Think of manufacturing, construction, those types of sectors, right? It's the ninth most targeted sector and had a 235.4% year over year increase when measured from April 23 to April 24, April 24 to April 25. That's just one of those ransomware and attacks in general are increasing year over year. Part of that is access to the tools is so prevalent nowadays. I can go get access to hacking tools in a matter of 30 seconds and just downloading a particular tool. AI, learning, YouTube University, right? Learning how to do this stuff is so much more prevalent rather than 15 years ago when you kind of had to crack open a book to get access to a lot of different things. But now there's YouTube channels that are out there teaching people how to do this. There's courses and there's sites in terms of Try Hack Me and Hack the Box that teach people from a subscription perspective of how to do this. And in some cases, it's on the up and up. In some cases, they're teaching how to do this from a what we call white hat perspective, right? You have white hat hacking and black hat hacking, right? Black hat, bad guys. They're the malicious actors. They're the ones that wish you harm or wish the company harm. White hat hackers or ethical hacking, they're hired by companies like mine. And we have companies that come to us and say, hey, we want a pen test or a penetration test, which is essentially them saying, hack us and tell us how you did it so we can fix it. So that they're kind of the ethical side or the white hat side, the pure side of hacking. But going to the next one here, according to the Verizon DBER, the data breach and incident report, ransomware was present in 30% of all public sector breaches analyzed in the 2025 reporting cycle. That means that not all of them, 70% didn't have ransomware reported as part of it. But breaches aren't necessarily entirely malicious. Sometimes there are a non-malicious insider threat where a data breach could be a mistaken email sent to someone external, right? So it could be a mistake rather than like a malicious, activity. But in 30% of all data breaches for public sector, ransomware was a component, which is massive. And then since local governments and municipalities operate similar to SMBs in terms of resources, right? Small IT teams, small resources, small budget for IT. I wanted to include this. The Verizon DBER found that 88% of SMB breaches involved ransomware compared to only 39% of larger enterprises. So kind of interesting in terms of going back and looking at the second bullet point saying 30% of public sector breaches, and public sector includes what you would initially think it to include, right? There's less ransomware from a public sector perspective than SMB in total, but thinking because there's the similar amount of resources, 88% of SMB breaches involve ransomware, and the percentage is increasing year over year, right? So that is a very concerning thing when I'm sitting here thinking about ransomware and or just what I need to be worried about from a cybersecurity perspective. Ransomware increasing, and because of the impact level that it has, it would be something that I would want to make sure that we have on the up and up. But one of the questions, and I kind of talked about this a little bit, and this is kind of where we can get a little bit of audience engagement. There's no wrong answers here, but why are municipalities high value targets? And I will go on mute for 30 seconds here to a minute and get a drink while people can put stuff in chat, or if somebody wants to come off mute and talk, that's fine too.
Thanks, Jimmy. Come on, don't be shy. We got a huge group here. Feel free to put in the chat if you don't want to unmute.
Anybody? It's fine.
Oh, they have multiple accounts? Question. Okay, Deanne said they have multiple accounts? Question mark.
Okay. Yeah, that's not a bad thought. Definitely multiple accounts. When I think of a high value target, I try to think of what my goal is from a malicious actor. Insurance, they'll pay. I appreciate it, Deanne. With insurance, they'll pay. That is 100. That's definitely a reason. Almost all municipalities really should have, insurance. Most companies have insurance nowadays. Weak firewalls, even without insurance, they will pay. We need to keep working 100%. Yeah, even if they don't have insurance. And I think you guys are all kind of going down the right vein, which is what I'm looking for. When I think of high targets or high value targets, I think of what if I wanted to get paid, who am I going to target? Somebody who deals with the public that has to be up and running, right? Operationally, they it is very impactful if they go down. Municipalities are in that category. What about other type of there you go, Victoria said it, sensitive data. What type of data do you guys have in your municipality networks that it would be a breach, right? Social security numbers, people's um, addresses, all that type of stuff, names, phone numbers, emails. There's a ton of different stuff, and I'm sure that I'm not even scratching the surface about all the type of data that you guys have in there. Legacy systems, small teams can be stretched thin. IT resources, yep. Um, yeah, hack the police. They may get access to federal resources. 100%. That's another one. It's the type of sensitive data, sensitive access. I think I've read everybody's so far. Yeah, you guys are all, and I appreciate the everybody kind of chiming in. And there's another question here in a second, so don't go too far away from your keyboards. But I agree. Municipalities, high value targets, the data that they have, that the operational need to keep moving forward and not be impacted. And there's political investment, public investment into the entities, the municipalities, right? Very, very big targets. And I think somebody hit it. They'll pay. They need to be up and running. And they're easier to hit because typically they have legacy or more legacy or older hardware, older processes, lower IT staff. The IT staff is stretched thin. So they don't have the protections against the latest and greatest attack methodologies, right? So here's the next question. Oh, if it'll click. There we go. What's the goal of a ransomware attack? And I think we kind of talked about this a little bit, right? So I'll give everybody here another 30 seconds to kind of post their response in the chat. But what is the goal of a ransomware attack? Money, state actors that just want to disrupt 100%. Yep. Yep. Money. It seems like everybody's on the money trail. Yep. That makes sense. Exfiltrate data, deny access, extortion, shock and awe. Yep. Manipulate a company to pay them, give their data back, forcing payment by creating pressure. 100%. Information to sell on the black market. Yeah, you guys are all on the right vein. All going down the right vein. Practice that's actually an interesting one. That's an interesting one, Sharon. We've seen that. We've seen, and it's why I kind of a little inside baseball with cybersecurity nerds. We track what are called tactics and techniques for different hacking groups or different state actors or state affiliated groups, and it's important because it is really difficult to tell where an attack is originating from or coming from. Nowadays, you can VPN or just create an AWS server or an Azure server, and it looks like the traffic's coming from Microsoft or Amazon or Google or whatever it may be. Gone are the days of kind of saying, "Oh, well, it's a Russian IP, it must be Russia," or it's a Chinese IP, it must be Chinese. It looks like a lot of it is just coming from the USA and US traffic. So the practice in terms of if they have a bigger target in mind, going through and testing their scripts, testing their methodology, testing their tactics and techniques is very key when going through and kind of practicing their technical chops, maybe preparing for a larger attack. That is definitely a reason. I think it's more of a reason for the state level or the state sponsored groups, but it is definitely a reason nonetheless. Money is probably the biggest reason, and then the second reason I would probably say would be disruption. people that just want, for whatever reason, just want to see the world burn, right? They just want to disrupt. Um, those are probably some of the bigger reasons. But I like Sharon. I like your thought process on that, because I don't normally, when I ask that question, I don't normally see that, but it is a very valid point. Yeah, insurance pays ransom or costs. Our insurance rates may increase. Yep, 100%. All of it, or a lot of it, has to do with the monetary. So the next item here, I kind of listed a little bit of my thoughts around, why municipalities are high value targets. And I think you guys all kind of hit down that same vein, but the data, public sector systems have some of the most sensitive data. We talked about that, right? Public trust and scrutiny. Public sector operates on public confidence, reputational damage, political fallout, community backlash. That's all valid, right? When systems go down, or people hear about a ransomware, they worry about their data. They worry about what, like, am I going to have identity theft, right? Am I going to have to worry about that? It is all very valid concern. Operational urgency, we talked about that, will pay. And why will they pay? Well, because you handle a lot of the most important things for the local communities. So it other reasons, like if they're disrupted, like there can be national headlines, right? There's a reason why we hear about ransomware all the time. When something gets impacted, national headlines are made, and it doesn't matter how small you are, it'll come through. And I see a question here. Dana said, "Can we have access to the slides and transcription afterwards for help remembering and reference?" I don't know about the transcription, but I will definitely be providing the slides over to Candace post this webinar. You guys are more than welcome to have the slides. But in terms of transcription, I'll let
We
Candace talk about that.
should we can work it out. We're gonna try to get this recording on our website, on our rolling website with the transcription as well. I'll work on it. Short answer is yes, we just have to figure out how to get it to you. But yes.
Awesome. Yeah, and if anybody has any questions like after this, or light bulbs go off, feel free to reach out to me. I think there's contact information at the back end of the slides. But I'm really passionate about education, so even if there's a question, like don't worry about reaching out. I'm happy to answer emails. But resource constraints is another one. Someone mentioned weak firewalls. Someone mentioned IT staff is stretched too thin. There's a ton of these reasons, right? But all of these reasons put together is almost one of those perfect storms, right? So please do not make the mistake of thinking that you're too small to target. You are, in fact, one of the primary targets that attackers would love to get access to. Because of all of these reasons, it creates the perfect storm, and they're going to get paid, right? Or they're going to achieve their goal of operational disruption, or it's a government entity that they can practice on, right? So there's all of these different reasons. They're all very valid. They're all very true. And it's one of the reasons that municipalities are high value targets. So now that we talked a little bit about the anatomy of an attack, we talked a little bit about why municipalities would be considered high value targets. Why are my arrow keys not working? There we go. Let's talk a little bit about 3 pillars of protection. Now, in terms of cybersecurity best practices, there are a ton of different. I'm sorry. I see a question here. Is there a state or federal law mandating notification of a data breach, not just an email takeover? Yes, there are federal. There are some federal laws. There is Pennsylvania laws. So Pennsylvania, I think it was 2024. I think it was May of 2024. I partnered with a law firm and gave some speeches about this, but time flies. So it could have been last year, but I think it was 2024. They redid their Data Breach Notification Act. So there are laws out there in terms of when you need to send notification, and what is required, what criteria need to be met. And if that criteria is met, how long you have until you have to report that sensitive information was accessed. So there are 100%. There could be local laws. From my perspective, it's really difficult to keep track of all the different types of laws that are out there for cybersecurity, data privacy, all that different type of stuff. But I do know that there's Pennsylvania laws there's a Pennsylvania Data Breach Notification Act. I wish there was more federally. I don't think there's a ton there, but there are definitely state laws that everybody has to adhere to. If the entity operates in the state, is headquartered in the state, they must adhere to the PA data breach notification law. In regards to the pillars of protection, there's a ton, like I said before, there's a ton of different frameworks that we could point to. There's a ton of different things we could talk about. Cybersecurity, and I kind of relate this. When somebody says, "Oh, you're a cybersecurity expert, you must know everything." No, 100% not true. Saying you were in cybersecurity or saying like you're in IT is very similar to saying that you're an engineer, right? Engineers specialize in civil, mechanical, biochemical, chemical. Like there are a ton of different disciplines in terms of engineering. Now, do they understand a little bit about the other stuff? Yeah, probably. It's very similar, like saying that you're a lawyer. There's specific practices and disciplines of different types of law that lawyers usually specialize into. So when saying that somebody works in IT, there's way too much in IT for one person to know everything. There's not enough time in a day. There's not enough sanity that a person can have to learn all of it. In fact, the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know. It is. I'm sure most things are like that in a lot of cases, right? But it is an ever-changing environment. There's a lot to learn. So the best advice that I have is have a good team that covers each other, right? And that's one of the things that I really like the company that I work for. We know that we don't know everything, but there are specific people that are experts in certain niches, and we know what those niches are, so we can kind of cover each other, and we can go and ask certain questions. Knowing when you need to ask for help is a very key thing, but I think that's also in life too, right? But the three pillars of protection, we'll talk about the shield, we'll talk about the vault, we'll talk about the playbook. This is the best way that I could think of breaking it down and trying to be not super technical about it, but also kind of saying like each of these things are very important as it relates to ransomware itself. There's a lot of other things that are important from cybersecurity best practice and could help with ransomware, but specifically around this type of incident. We'll talk about the shield, the vault, and the playbook. So the shield focuses on keeping the bad guys out. Most ransomware attacks don't hack in, they log in. This is even true in the case of York. They got in through a back door, but they logged in through the back door, right? It wasn't taking advantage of a vulnerability. It wasn't hacking in that sense. It is just taking credentials and logging in. Now it's unauthorized access because they shouldn't have those credentials, right? But they logged in. They didn't necessarily hack in when people typically think of hack, sitting back there creating a script and taking advantage of a vulnerability on a system. Now, some ransomware attacks, 100%, they come from hacking. It is. I am not saying that they don't come from that. It's just most ransomware attacks, they log in, mainly because they're trying to spray and pray. They are trying to send out all the phishing emails. They are just trying to get the low-hanging fruit of the people that are going to click on those particular links. They're going to be susceptible. They're going to fall victim to it. Then when they have credentials, they try to use them. They try to exploit them. So how do you protect against that? Well, the key tech here would be multi-factor authentication as well as security awareness training. Multi-factor authentication, if you think about it, it is a second factor versus your username and password. So when you log in, you have your username, password. I'm sure most people here are familiar with multi-factor authentication, two-factor authentication, 2FA, MFA. It has a bunch of different acronyms, bunch of different ways that you can talk about it. But essentially, multi-factor authentication makes you have two things of either what you are, what you know, or what you have, right? Those are the three different kind of things that you can pull from, and you need to have two. But multi-factor can also mean more than two, right? You can have three. Multi-factor authentication it used to be the silver bullet against ransomware, against any sort of malicious actor trying to gain access using credentials. It is not so much anymore. Attacks have gotten really sophisticated. I could probably go down into the details of that, but essentially they can steal current logged in sessions and be able to use that without even knowing what the password is. But they can steal that session token and be able to use that. So there's other protections that we can get into about that, but that's kind of going down the rabbit hole a little bit. I'm kind of trying to keep this high level, multi-factor authentication. So again, typical ones for most people they have for their like banking or sensitive information that they have personally, right? You have your username and password. It's something you know. Something you have might be your phone, and you have an authenticator on your phone, right? So that could be something you have. Something you are. Most people have phones, right? If you ever use your fingerprint to log into your phone, boom, there that's a biometric thing, right? Something you are, right? So it's kind of the three things multi-factor authentication can be made up from. Again, something you know, something you have, something you are. Most of the time, it's username, password, which is something you know, and then some sort of authenticator on your phone. Maybe it could be a USB key, could be an ID card, that sort of thing for something you have. But multi-factor authentication is kind of it is the biggest thing that I would recommend, and making sure that it is everywhere. There shouldn't be any exceptions. Oh, this person's high up, this person's high ranking official. They want an exception. Nope. If they're a high ranking official, they're probably more likely to be targeted. I want more security on those individuals. And then security awareness training is more so along the lines of just talking through, going through and getting trained every year and talking about it and what to look for in terms of phishing emails, in terms of what's out there, and in terms of the threat landscape. Security awareness training, I have to go through it, right? Even though I create programs that do it, I still have to go through it, and it is annoying for me. It's boring. I answer all the questions as fast as I can to get through it, but it is important. It's important to have that first thought in your head of do not click this link. And if I could give any recommendation to anybody to change in terms of something to do personally, whether in work or their personal life, if you receive an email that has a link, please do not click on that link unless you are 100% sure, 100% sure that that link is valid. Do not click on it. I would much rather you go to the actual website and try to find it that way rather than clicking the link. That would probably save 90% of phishing scenarios if people just did not click links inside of email. And I know that from a business operation perspective, it's almost impossible to be able to do that all the time. But that would probably be my biggest recommendation is just don't click links. Security awareness training talks about what to look for, how to try to determine if an email is phishing. It used to be back in the day, it was easy to tell, right? Words were misspelled. It seemed like it was English second language, right? It was easy to say, okay, who wrote this, right? It was easy to tell what a phishing email was. Nowadays, it's a lot harder because AI is creating a lot of it. So the giant red flags are no longer giant red flags. So now you need to look at the smaller red flags to help determine if something would be malicious or is potentially malicious. The key thing here is users are your first line of defense. So defending the user and having the user be part of that security culture and understand how valuable their login credentials are and how valuable it is that they pay attention and report the suspicious emails. It's paramount to a security culture and good cybersecurity hygiene. I would recommend personally training be done annually at minimum. And then if, we have or organizations have services that can actually phish the users as a training exercise. So they're not like bad phishing emails. They're more of like us sending them out to try to phish the user. And if they click the link or try to put their credentials in, it says, this was bad. Here's why it was bad, all that type of stuff. I would recommend remedial training for users who fail at those. That way, again, trying to just reiterate, do not fall for this type of stuff. But that's the shield. So let's talk about the vault. The purpose of this pillar is reducing the likelihood of having to pay the ransom. So, well, how would you do that? Backups, backups, backups. Having backups of your data that are stored. There's different methodologies. The number one methodology is usually the 3-2-1, which is 3 copies, 2 locations, 1 offsite. I believe I might be a little bit wrong. on the 321 itself. But the biggest piece that I want to talk about as it relates to backups is having immutable backups. What does immutable mean? It means unchangeable. These backups, they can't be encrypted. They can't be changed. They can't be deleted. They can't be altered, even with administrative access, right? Immutable backups are the cornerstone. If you have ransomware spreading throughout the environment, if you have immutable backups, they're not going to get encrypted. Now, what could potentially happen is that specific system could be taken offline. There's other ways that the malicious actor can attack immutable backups if they identify that you have them. But being able to restore from backup and not having to pay the ransom is a good way of making sure that you're going through and having business continuity. Now, it's not, again, a silver bullet, because you are probably spending a couple weeks restoring from backups, right? It is not a snap the fingers done. There is a resource time, resource spend going through and restoring things from backup. And before you restore things from backup, you want to make sure the ransomware is out, because as soon as you start restoring things from backups, they could just be re-encrypted again. Now, the immutable backups shouldn't be impacted because they're immutable, if they are immutable. But this is one of the newer things, having immutable backups. It is one of the newer things in terms of protection against ransomware. A lot of people have backups. They take backups of their data. Ask if they're immutable. Ask if they're unchangeable. That is one of the key things in terms of ransomware, or to protect against ransomware. So let's kind of talk about the playbook. This is kind of knowing what to do when things go wrong. Like, make no mistake, ransomware can be a public safety event, right? It's not always, not just an IT event. And that's something I think a lot of people think about when they think of ransomware, or even just malware in general, right? When there's cybersecurity hackers, we're talking public safety events at that point, not just IT. 100% IT is involved, right? But it's not just an IT event. It's public safety. If you're waiting until you start to see certain things occur before you start having conversations and going through a playbook, you're already behind, right? You're already behind. There are conferences, and I think we just had a conference. I think it was at Harrisburg University a month or two ago, and I see a couple colleagues on online here with me, so you guys can correct me if I'm wrong. I think it was within the past couple months. There was a big conference, and the FBI came and talked at it. The FBI is willing to help. Even if you want to do a tabletop exercise, you want to pull an FBI individual in, they will come in and help if they have time. They will 100% help in terms of, this is what we see from our side. This is what we recommend you do. Now, they probably won't run a tabletop exercise for you, but they will most likely assist and be part of a tabletop exercise for you. And when I say tabletop exercise, think of a theoretical, hypothetical event. It would be like somebody like me coming in and sitting down with the powers that be, the decision makers, and say, okay, you come in Monday morning and you have ransomware on your system. What do you do? Right. And we kind of think through, think of like a board game, right? It's essentially gamifying what it is, but it's a calm, no fault environment to be able to talk through what that playbook looks like. Even professional athletes have to practice. Going through and having your playbook, it is practicing, right? Having your incident response plan, doing a tabletop exercise, you have your game plan and you practice your game plan. I highly recommend practicing those plans, or doing a tabletop exercise every year, every 12 months. And whenever there's a major shift in terms of officials being elected, or specific people that are decision makers changing hands, right? Whenever there's a major shift from a decision maker perspective, go through and do another tabletop exercise. Make sure people understand what their roles and responsibilities are when it comes to an event, right? Understand who gets to decide when it's called an incident. When do you call the insurance carrier? When do you call the FBI? Do you call the FBI, right? All of those questions should be known ahead of time, or the answers to those questions should be known ahead of time before you go into an incident. Incidents are very high stress. Everybody just wants to get back to the point that they were operational, right? Everybody is worried. Everybody is stressed. Everybody is working, to the bone. There are a lot of things that you can decide ahead of time, or at least put procedures in place of how to decide. You can put those in place ahead of time, which makes things a lot smoother and carries through that process. I'm not saying it's still not going to be stressful, but it will take some of that stress away and allow you to focus on those other stressors. So I see a question here, Carol. Any contacts for FBI for training? So if you, there actually is, if you, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head what the website is. If you just go for FBI cyber report, if you Google that, you should come up. It should be in one of the top like 5 or something results, where you can call the hotline, you can call their non-emergency number, call and chat, send an email, request a resource. Now, not all the time will they provide a resource for your tabletop exercise, but a lot of times they will if they have the capability of doing so. But it's all publicly available. So I would just go to the FBI's website in terms of cyber reporting and look and see what is there. Other important security controls. So this kind of talks through other things that aren't necessarily 100% ransomware related, but still very, very important, right? I don't want to undersell these at all. They're cybersecurity best practice. In some instances, I would say more important than some of the other stuff in terms of ransomware, or in terms of what ransomware you talked about, the pillars, right? Oh, there you go, Brian Bronstein. InfraGard. That's the name of the conference. Thank you, Brian. I couldn't remember. There's too many conferences around here. InfraGard was the one that I was talking about, where the FBI was chatting about different tabletop exercise stuff. I appreciate you, Brian. So in terms of security controls, very, very important ones that I would highly recommend you also look at. And these help with ransomware, but aren't necessarily 100% to combat ransomware itself, right? Patching and endpoint hardening. Patching is just a thing you need to do, right? It's keeping things up to date. Patches fix vulnerabilities that are on systems. They make things more secure. They fix problems. Endpoint hardening is essentially a fancy way of saying turning things off that don't need to be there. If you're curious and you want, it's more of like going down into the weeds. But there's a lot of information, and endpoint hardening is a rabbit hole, and it's something I'm passionate about because it's what I started in when I started in cybersecurity. But email security is another. This is essentially trying to put a firewall, if you will, in front of email. So it tries to get rid of the spam. I'm assuming most of you have this already. Microsoft has this built in to some degree as well if you use Microsoft or O365. And it is essentially your pre-first line defense, right? Because it's trying to stop things from getting to the user itself. Endpoint and network security, EDR, firewall, zero trust, etc. These are all very technical things that a security or IT or network engineer is going to be implementing and using, but they all have their own specific cases of what they help with and combating just malicious software or malware in general, right, including ransomware. In fact, there are tools out there that will literally just not allow a script or an executable or anything to run unless it is known good, right? Calling it zero trust, right? If it's not a known good program, it just won't run. It's not allowed to run. Now, there's pros and cons to that, right? Because that can be user impacting if they want to download Spotify and Spotify is not a known good program, right? Then if you want to allow it, you can allow it. So it adds a whole other process there. But there's trade-offs for a lot of security. And when I talk about security, usually it's a seesaw, right? You have user convenience on one side and you have security on the other side. When one goes up, the other goes down and vice versa. So as you have more security, you have less user convenience. And usually it's the other way around. When you have more user convenience, you have less security. So there are trade-offs when talking about these tools, and understanding what those trade-offs are is very important. But having them makes you more secure and more readily either able to combat the malicious activity, or just not have the malicious activity at all because the tool may stop it. Audit logging and monitoring is essentially just having a team that is actively looking at all the logs going through your environment. So if anything gets past your defense layers, you can see the traffic and potentially respond to it before it becomes a big bad scenario. And then limiting unnecessary third party and vendor access. This is something that is very big that I don't think a lot of entities are really taking seriously, or well, maybe not taking seriously. They just don't have the time, I think. And it's kind of one of the new areas that people are expanding into from a cybersecurity perspective. But supply chain risk, third party vendor access, like vendor risk management. If they have access into your environment, what does their security look like? Right? Because if they get breached or they have a hacker in their environment and they have access into yours, well, that hacker could get access into your environment too. Understanding where those are, like where that potential access can be, where you have confidential, sensitive data, sensitive information stored on third party platforms, right? Microsoft is a big one. If you use Microsoft for an email, they have access to your emails, right? If Microsoft gets breached, well, a lot of other things are probably going wrong at that point too. But those are the types of things to think about, right? When thinking about limiting unnecessary third party and vendor access. So I only have a few more slides to go through, but kind of leading through the noise. This is kind of a culminating piece here, right? So I have questions here. They're going to be on these slides. We also have a handout that's a PDF that'll be sent out. But these are kind of tomorrow morning questions for your IT team and why they're important, right? Is MFA required for everyone in all accounts? Do you have MFA? Where is it? Is it everywhere? Is there an exception? Is there an account out there that somebody doesn't want to put MFA on because it's not convenient, right? I would have MFA everywhere, and there are very minor exceptions, and I could go down the rabbit hole and talk about those what those minor exceptions are. But for most cases, I would just say have MFA. For any for any exclusions, talk to your local cybersecurity expert. I would say because they're very situational. Do we have an immutable backup of our critical data? If York had it, they might not have needed to pay the ransom, right? If they actually had backups and were able to restore, they might not have needed to actually pay the ransom. Now, it then comes down to, or I guess this, I'll talk about this next question because it's kind of in vein with that. What is our maximum tolerable downtime? So the answer can't be 0 days, right? If you have an incident and you're saying our maximum downtime is 0 days, you're essentially saying that you're just going to pay the ransom every single time because you need to get access back as soon as possible. It's probably a low number of days, but it is most likely not 0 in terms of tolerable downtime. Now, tolerable is a very subjective term, right? You would have to define that. But when you think about tolerable downtime, also then go and look at your recovery plan. So even if you have immutable backups, right? If your recovery plan saying, hey, it's going to take us, you talk to your IT team and they say, well, we can restore the entire environment, but it's going to take us 10 days from the immutable backups. Well, if your tolerable downtime is 3 days, there's a problem there, right? You're saying that you can only tolerate 3 days of downtime, but it's going to take you 10 days to recover. So you need to know what those return time objectives, return point objectives, those are all very cybersecurity terms, but you need to know what that tolerable downtime is for yourself, for your organization, for your municipality. That way you can start working to determine how do we get our recovery time, a recovery plan, and our tolerable downtime to match, or the recovery time is lower than the tolerable downtime, right? Usually when you're talking that, you're talking money, right? You have to pay for different tools. You have to pay for different processes, that sort of stuff. But that's all stuff that needs to be talked about. It needs to be looked at. It needs to be, decided on. And the risk needs to be accepted. Does our cyber insurance require specific controls? This is a big one that I think a lot of people don't focus on. Read your cybersecurity insurance or your cyber insurance contract. A lot of times there are gotchas in there in terms of when you bring in forensics, it needs to be this team. We need to be involved at this stage, so on and so forth. There are specific things in cyber insurance contracts that if you don't follow to the T, they'll sit there and say, well, we're not paying. You didn't do the proper thing. We're not going to pay. Yeah, you've paid for insurance, but you didn't follow the contract. Make sure you know what's in the contract. If they require specific controls, because if they do their forensic analysis and find that you said yes to something and you didn't have it, they now have the right to be able to not pay, right? So it make sure you understand cyber insurance is a control. Make sure you understand what that control is. Make sure you understand the requirements. Make sure you implement the requirements. When is our next tabletop exercise? Have that playbook, practice, communicate, talk internally, make sure people are aware of at what point they need to be involved in certain decisions, right? Don't test your plan live, right? And like I said here, even professional athletes need to practice. Those would be all the things that I would recommend that you ask. Again, all of these questions are on the handout that are going to be sent out after this. But one thing that, or one last thing is, anybody have any questions? I see. All right, Brian. Tim said, would you recommend adding an Albert sensor for additional security? Honestly, I haven't heard of an Albert sensor before. So I don't know. I'm assuming what I'm assuming for, or what you're talking about for that, is what would be called a honeypot. Um, Honeypots are very valuable. There are a lot of security tools that are very valuable, but what I would say is, um, the value usually comes from uh, oh, okay. Thank you, Brian. Yes. Yeah, I would definitely monitor that. I would definitely have, Brian posted in the chat that they're provided by CIS. It's a port mirroring passive monitor. Yes, I would definitely have that if capable, right? But the biggest thing, and this is what I was going to lead into, the biggest thing with security tools, it's great if you have them. Most of the time, you need to have the team and the staff to be able to staff them and use them correctly. If you're not using them correctly, yeah, you can sit here and say, well, we have like CrowdStrike EDR, we have this tool, we have that tool. It's the biggest in the industry, it's the best. But if you don't have the team to staff it and use it appropriately, it's not going to be the best. So I would recommend whatever you can do well, do it. But if you're talking about doing passive monitor, is somebody going to be looking at it, right? So like, yes, it's a very good thing to do that, but are people actually going to be paying attention to it? Would be my question. But yeah, I would certainly do an Albert sensor. Anybody else have any other questions? I know I spoke for an hour. Oh, can you talk about WordPress, Joomla, open source platforms, and any related considerations? And you haven't uh, mentioned Wisp. So open source is interesting. Open source doesn't necessarily mean bad. It just means that there's other risks that are involved. And typically, and open source, for those that aren't aware, open source is that the program is known to the public. It is usually managed for most cases or some cases by the public. Some organizations have free tools that they consider open source. The code in the back end and how the application is developed is public knowledge, which means that if an attacker wants to attack something and it's open source, they generally know what they're going to do, right? They can get access to it locally, they can pull it down, all that type of stuff. Not always, but sometimes open source applications are slower to update and slower to fix security holes. But sometimes open source is the only answer, right? So there are definitely things to consider, with open source platforms. But I would 100% consider the risks of the fact that they are open source. We've used open source things for items in the past, right? It's not that it's inherently bad. It just things need to be thought about. What parts of response planning are most often missing in smaller local government? Uh, I think the biggest thing is just not understanding how big the impact really is, and trying to implement a business continuity plan that matches what that would specifically be. So, like when we talked about like the maximum tolerable downtime, and what your recovery plan is and the timeline for that. I think that's missing in terms of a lot of local government, and I think, and this is something that is very prevalent in the realm of cybersecurity. Most people look at IT, or a lot of individuals will look at IT and think it's magic, and that they can snap their fingers and things will start working again, right? Or they'll just solve the problem. Things in IT is a lot of research. It's a lot of trial and error. It's a lot of configuration, right? Things take time to get back up and running. And I think that they think it'll be quicker than what it really is. But again, it really depends on what tools they have available. How big is your IT staff, right? Like how well are they trained? I think that would probably be the biggest piece. Um, but also, I don't see a lot of municipalities reaching out to the FBI either. And talking to the FBI and seeing how the FBI could help, or taking advantage of free resources from CISA or any of the federal agencies. So there's a couple of things that I would say that are missing. Usually they say, "Oh, our IT guys got it right," and then they're like, "I'm just going to dictate to the IT guys or the IT team." And it's well, yes, but there are decisions that the IT staff might not be able to answer, and we need some sort of official or some other higher entity to be able to answer certain things. Mixing in customized WordPress, so it's not always public. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Not necessarily, or will everything be open source? Sometimes people pull it down and we'll customize the open source application, make it that hybrid. So yeah, 100%. Do any insurance policies ever forbid open source? There are insurance policies out there that cover the gambit, right? So yes, but not all of them do. Read yours, ensure that yours is okay with it, or if there's any specific or technical controls around open source there. Um, will some insurance policies require additional audits? Yes. Some insurance policies will require that you go through a tabletop exercise with them every year. Some insurance policies will require that you go through we call a framework audit or a GRC or cybersecurity best practice review or something like that every year. Usually it's done through their questionnaire that they say, like, do you have MFA? Do you have EDR? Do you have information security policies? Do you have all this type of stuff? And you're going through and checking the list. There are a ton of different things, right, that an insurance company can require on you. Generally speaking, it's cybersecurity best practice stuff, right? So for people like me, I come in and I help kind of demystify what that may look like and to try to help build a program that you are going to build the security program faster than the insurance is going to require it. Some insurance companies are requiring people to adhere to actual cybersecurity frameworks, like the NIST cybersecurity framework or the NIST CSF, or the CIS implementation group, right? There's a ton of different frameworks that are out there, but some of them do have that additional items. Another, how to mitigate against a potentially rogue IT company. What are best practices in terms of how to help a board of supervisors actually be in control of their data? For example, I believe my township only has one O365 admin that can. Ooh, that's interesting. Some of these would probably be really difficult to answer from an open-ended perspective because in a lot of these, there are specific scenarios where I'd want to ask you questions that might not be great for a public forum. But I'll try to answer as much as I can talking around generally. So potentially rogue IT company. This is a great scenario. And it's actually one of the ones I talk about internally at my company all the time because we are an IT managed services company, right? We provide managed services to a lot of organizations. So one of the things that we talk about is what happens if we get breached? Or we just have somebody who has a bad day and decides that they want to mess something up at one of our clients, right? It is a risk, right? How do you deal with it? There needs to be checks and balances. There needs to be some sort of admin or some sort of IT like individual on that other particular side that can delete access as fast as possible. And there should be some sort of notification or at least discussions with that IT company on, is it just one individual? Are there checks and balances internally? Like at least I can speak for us at Appalachia. We have multiple different levels, right? And we have multiple teams. If I see that something malicious is occurring and we need to communicate out to the client to shut down or do whatever access that we need to do, we're going to shut down that rogue internal employee ourselves. But we also want to make sure that they're cutting the access just in case, and then we can reach back out when the incident has occurred. But do a background check. Make sure that the IT company that you're partnering with can be trusted. Those are all good things too. there's a lot of other things that I would want to ask that would be more personal to your side. Um, Best practices in terms of help the board of supervisors actually be in control of their data. I think the board of supervisors need to trust someone internal. There needs to be a champion internally that can control their data and at least manage the external partner. That way, it's not just that the consultant being the admin, right? Um, there, the consultant being an admin is fine. They shouldn't be the only one. There needs to be someone else there because what happens if the consultant leaves, right? How do you get access to that admin account? Like there should be another one that's known internally. Okay, there's others. I'm scrolling through here. Sorry, guys. Is there a type of verification question one could ask a potential impersonator that AI would be less likely to know how to answer, but humans asking and answering would know, even if the questioner and answer are relative strangers? That's interesting. Um, I'm not aware of something that you may be able to ask human to human without knowing each other very well. I think it would just be conversation, right? Like and this is the problem. AI is as bad today as it's ever going to be. It will, and that will be true tomorrow and the next day and the next day and the next. It will only get better. There are so many videos out there nowadays. It used to be easy, like, oh, there's 6 fingers on the hand. It's AI. Well, there's a lot more AI out there now that people are looking at. They're like, no, this isn't AI. This is a fine picture. No, that's AI. You can tell by some lighting. There's certain there's it to not talk about like the soul of a picture, but you can almost tell when something doesn't have like a soul or an essence to it. It's AI, right? I feel that way in conversations with AI. There, it's very snappy. It's very responsive. Um, and it doesn't feel like it has that kind of character to it. Now, is it 100% sure? I don't know, but that's internally at least. You should know how certain people talk, their mannerisms. You can set up different words. If you are going to set up a word, and I have had people say this before, or I've had people do this, if you set up a word that is kind of like a password, it treat it like any other password. Do not write it down. Do not have it in documentation. Don't have it anywhere. It should just be something that is verbal and is known. Think of like passwords that you would give your kids when they were growing up, right? And you had, hey, if I ever have to have a stranger come pick you up, give this challenge response to them, right? And they have to respond with this. That way, you know it's valid. Um, it's not written down. It's just something that is known, right? All right, Brian, you're in here answering questions. Thank you, man. I appreciate it. I think those are all the questions that I see in the chat. Does anybody else have any other questions, comments, concerns, feedback?
This was great, Jimmy. Thank you.
Of course. But if anybody wants to reach out or has any questions, if you want to stay connected, this is contact information for Appalachia. If you wanted to email me directly, just take away info and put jimmy.armor. that'll be that'll be my email address. So feel free to reach out. Feel free to contact us. I do have a sources page here for where I found a lot of the information that I use for public record for York and some of the statistics like the Verizon Deber and Zscaler and stuff like that. What I will do is I will send this PowerPoint presentation. Candace, I'll send this over to you. Feel free to send it out. There's no confidential information or anything like that in here that we need to scrub or anything like that. But yeah, if no one else has any other questions, that's all I have.
All right. I'll try to get this out by the end of the day tomorrow, everyone. Thank you all so much, and thanks to Jimmy again. And you'll probably be seeing them. You're seeing them a little bit later. We're hoping with the League Learning Academy to launch some, cybersecurity courses, some longer form courses that you all are used to from our program. So feel free. You can email us any hot topics or things that you would like to see another webinar on, because we want to hear from you. We want to hear what's going on, and I will absolutely pass that information on to Jimmy. You can, email us here at the League. Any suggestions and things, because we're putting together some longer curriculum. But other than that, enjoy your Thursday and almost weekend, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.